August 8, 2014. My wife, Andrea, wakes me up at 4 a.m. to tell me we both have missed calls from my sister, Vicki. I check my voicemail and I learn that Dad has fallen. He hit his head, had a seizure, and is being airlifted to the hospital. I had another voicemail from a phone number I didn't recognize. It is a hospital asking me to call them. I called them back first and I bounced around from nurse's station to nurse's station for what seemed like an eternity. Fear begins to creep in, and I'm thinking that no one wants to tell me that Dad has died. During my first real panic in my life, God's Holy Spirit connects with my spirit, and I hear, "Your dad has gone into his lion's den, but don't fear. I am right there with him." A peace broke over my fear, and a nurse finally answered the phone. She told me Dad was alive, but I should come to the emergency room immediately. I got dressed and made the hour-long journey to St. David's Medical Center in Austin, Texas, a little quicker than an hour. When I arrived in Dad's room, he was curled up in the fetal position on a stretcher. He was conscious, so I talked with him. His responses were very slow and weak. I asked Mom and Vicki what medicine had they given him. Their reply was nothing. I knew then it was serious. For the next few days, I watched Dad stabilize as they waited for the blood that collected on his brain from the fall to coagulate so they could go in there and remove it. Early the next week, I get a phone call from Vicki before I leave the office. She says that nothing is wrong, but I really needed to come and see Dad. She was right. Dad was like I'd never seen him before. I'm not sure if it was the blood coagulating on his brain or the medicines they were giving him, but he was in rare form. It was a stream of consciousness that couldn't be stopped. He had no gate and he had no filter. He was talking about everything from his childhood, his army days, and his career. He would mention old girlfriends, but then he'd realize Mom was in the room and say, well, there wasn't that many girlfriends. I finally interrupted him and said, "Dad, you're drunk." He indignantly replied, "I'm not drunk. I don't drink." Well, there was this time in the Army, and maybe a couple of sales meetings here and there. He then turned it around on me. He said, "You're the one who drinks too much." Dad had been to several of my company Christmas parties where I may have been overserved once or every time. So I replied, "Well, Dad, that's social drinking." I then quote my Aunt Sue, who told me that, they're covering their ears, it's their mother, the dearly departed, Aunt Sue. I then quote my Aunt Sue, who told me that people from the North can social drink and stop whenever they want to, whereas people from the South can't stop drinking once they start. So Dad got quiet. A few minutes passed, and we'd moved on to another conversation. Unexpectedly, Dad says, "Let me ask you a question. Where'd you go to college, son?" I answer, "Southern Tech in Marietta." He replies, "Oh yeah, that's right. Vicki and I look at each other with concern. A few moments later, he asks, "What about high school? Where did you graduate?" "Union County High School, Dad, same as you." "All right. I'd like to ask you one more question. What hospital were you born at?" "It's the one in Hiawassee, Dad." Vicki looks as if she needs to go and get the nurse, but Dad actually had me right where he wanted me. He smiled and said, "Don't look now, son, but I believe you're from the South." He was implying, "Are you sure you could stop drinking?" He hadn't lost his mind. He was as sharp as ever, and he had just lawyered me into a corner. It was so much fun chatting with him like that. But in the next few days, he loses consciousness. He begins struggling to breathe, and they put him on a ventilator. The surgeon doesn't understand why it's happening and decides that he better expedite the brain surgery. After the surgery, we wait for Dad to wake up. He doesn't. Hours turn into days, and days turn into weeks. We have no idea if Dad can hear us or not. We have no idea if Dad is even in there. And then I get the news about his former coworker and close friend, Glenn Davenport. Glenn was recovering from a surgery he had had and heard the news about Dad's fall. As soon as Glenn could speak, he asked, "How's my buddy Danny doing?" I told Dad what Glenn had said when I thought Dad was asleep. Once he heard me, he raised his hand and placed it over his heart, and a tear rolled down his cheek. What a bond those two must have shared. We knew then that Dad was in there. Now, by now, they've had to install a feeding tube, and they've done a tracheotomy. The doctor decided to do another brain surgery because Dad just wasn't waking up. The second one didn't help. The neurosurgery team essentially had just given up. Now, even though Dad was not recovering, they were beginning to transfer him out of ICU and into IMCU and then finally to the floor. Nearly 2 months has passed and Dad is still not awake. Now, a doctor from Houston, who was a friend of one of the internal medicine doctors, takes a look at Dad's case. He suggests his calcium being elevated may be keeping him asleep. They gave Dad a shot to lower his calcium and then he woke up. He was then transferred to another facility for long-term acute care, and after a couple of months there, he was transferred to one of the worst skilled nursing facilities I'd ever seen. It was at least conveniently located right next to my office within walking distance, but Dad went downhill quick. So after a week, we pulled him and took him back to St. David's, where they were now able to treat his calcium disorder with another surgery. He spent Christmas 2014 in the hospital, and after he stabilized, we checked him out into a much better skilled nursing facility named Bel Air. Can't go wrong with a name like Bel Air. Where after 3 months, he was sent home. We were glad to have him, but he was sent home a quadriplegic. One of his vocal cords was paralyzed, so he could only whisper to us. He never walked again, nor did he ever enjoy another meal. He would laugh, and he would cry, but we never told him about Glenn Davenport passing away. We never told him about his Uncle Jack Deaver passing away, or when Hoyt King died, or when Kellen Rhodes died. We'd felt that Dad had done enough suffering, so we didn't want him to be sad. The man was so tough. We were always hopeful that he would get better as we would see signs of improvement. He did have major secretions, which would trigger coughing episodes that would last all night. He would have an occasional seizure, which usually ended up with a trip to the hospital. He generally came back stronger after a seizure, and he even fought off pneumonia. He was a night owl, staying awake until the wee hours of the morning and then sleeping until noon or 1 o'clock. For 2 years, 5 months, and 18 days, we had Dad home. Then on September the 19th of this year at 12:59 p.m., I get a call from Mom. Your dad is having a seizure. I leave the office and I call 911. When I arrive 30 minutes later, they have him loaded on the stretcher, but he's still seizing. The paramedics recommended the nearest hospital because he could not stop the seizing. After seizing for nearly 2 hours, the hospital staff gets it stopped by giving him enough propofol to stop his breathing. For the next week, he is sedated, but hooked up to a brain monitor, which showed he was having continuous seizures. They removed the sedation, and then we could finally actually see the seizures happening. You know, it's one thing to watch a seizure on a computer monitor while your dad is resting comfortably under sedation. It's quite another thing to watch them in real time happening to your loved one. Just by touching Dad, it would trigger a seizure. The neurologist who worked around the clock on Dad, even forgetting to pick up her 3-year-old twins from daycare, took us to the tiny consultation room and explained how bad it was. She said normally she could control seizures with at least just 2 anti-seizure medicines. She had Dad on 4, and he was still having seizures. She said whenever she couldn't get a seizure to stop, an operation could be done, where the surgeon removes part of the brain which is triggering the seizure. She said in Dad's case, they're originating in his lower right, his upper right, his lower left, and his upper left portions of his brain. They would have to remove his entire brain. He was gone, and we had to make the heartbreaking decision of transferring him to comfort care and then to hospice. As he was leaving the ICU, one of his nurses told me that she had never seen patients come in who had been bedridden for over 3 years and their body be in such great condition as Dad's. She told me that she needed to get nursing tips from my sister Vicki. There is no way I can repay you, Vicki, for the care you gave our dad. I want you to know that it was not in vain. Because of you, my children will remember their grandfather. I can never repay you for that. Because of you, Dad got to see his son promoted to vice president and general manager. He then got to see me promoted to president. I am ever so grateful for you. I love you too. I share the last part of Dad's life because many here today may not know how bad it really was. You may remember Dad from work. Glad to see Clifton here. Or from school. Met a lot of his classmates. Or from family gatherings. Moron twins. They're not twins. But you might never have witnessed his suffering. For the family, it could be easy to let the last 3 years define who Dad was. But that doesn't define who Daddy was. Unfortunately for his 3 grandchildren, and especially 6-year-old David with his back turned, their memory of their grandfather will predominantly be of a bedridden quadriplegic. So I'd like to spend my remaining time sharing with you all, but especially with my children, who my dad was. My sister and I have agreed to the inscription we want on his gravestone. You just heard it in the previous song. George Daniel Morgan, the most godlike man a child could know. The God of the Bible is a God of wrath, a God of mercy, a God who sacrifices, and a God of love. My earliest remembrance of Dad's wrath was when I was younger. I had this bad defiance habit where I would pee in the bathroom seat of the bathtub. I had to be, what, Mom, 17, 18 years old? I'm kidding, of course. I was 4 or 5. I remember being told to stop doing that. Of course, I didn't listen. And then I felt Dad's wrath. My kids had Elf on the Shelf to motivate them. Dad had a belt on his waist. I still remember the distinctive sound his belt made as it became unsheathed. His justifiable wrath worked, and I haven't peed in a sink or bathtub ever since. I've thought about it, but I haven't done it. Yeah, that's smoking the baby. You're right, you nailed it. Wouldn't look nice all over the highways. Both the Old and the New Testament records God's disciplining nature. For the Lord disciplines those he loves. Proverbs 3:12 and Hebrews 12:6. Then there was a time he left the key in the riding lawnmower. He was in the house taking a break, so at 5 years of age, I climbed up to take it for a spin. I tried cranking it up. The engine turned over but didn't start. Now, realizing at a young age that sound traveled, I waited a few moments before I tried once more. When Dad didn't show up, I turned the ignition key again. This time, I was successful. So I take off on my 5-year-old adventure. Then I hear a door slam. Here comes Dad running after me. He'd almost caught up to me when I found the throttle. Now, I was unable to read the words fast and slow, but fortunately, the great engineers at American Machine and Foundry designed the lawnmower for the illiterate. They had a picture of a turtle at the bottom and a rabbit at the top. And I remember reasoning in my 5-year-old mind that rabbits were faster than turtles, so I shoved the throttle right up to the rabbit. Right when Dad lunged for me. He had not calculated that his son would figure out the throttle, and he fell right to the ground. I thought at this point, oh no, this is going to make the beating all the worse. Well, the fall apparently gave Dad a burst of adrenaline because he leapt to his feet and then chased me down. And I would have gotten away too had I knew how to shift gears. Now, surprisingly, Dad did not whip me for this incident. He did something even more sinister. See, normally after Dad would finish mowing the lawn, all 3 of his kids would get a treat by sitting in Dad's lap and doing laps around the house. He punished all 3 kids by taking away that privilege. He basically turned Karen and Vicki against me, which wasn't all that hard to do. So they took me out back and beat me up. The man was a genius. Dad was also a dad of mercy, another godlike trait. I remember one of the great arguments that Mom and I got into as a teenager. There were many. And I stormed outside and I banged on the entryway window just to make my point. I either miscalculated my own strength or the window pane's weakness, and I put my hand right through the window, shattering the glass and cutting up my hand. Now, Dad happened to see the whole thing unfold. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to get it now. He walked over, grabbed the box, and began picking up the glass. He said, tomorrow after school, I'll take you to the hardware store, we'll buy a replacement, and I'll show you how to fix a window. I asked, well, aren't you going to spank me? No, son. I'm going to show you mercy. And watching him pick up the pieces while being gentle to me actually hurt worse than any spanking I could have received. I would have actually rather had the beating. Mercy hurts worse than wrath, especially when you know you deserve the wrath. Now I know some people today would say that spankings are child abuse, and I would respectfully disagree. I'm thankful for the correction that my dad gave me, and he never used his fist. Well, there was this one time he did take a swing at me, but I'm certain you'll agree that I had it coming. I was a teenager, perhaps 15 or 16, and Dad came home from work and said, son, we need to gather some firewood, a cold front's coming. Now, being the lazy teenager I didn't want to go, so I made some excuses. Dad, it's been raining. We're going to get down there in the valley and we're going to get the tractor stuck in the mud. Let's just wait until it dries. Not listening to my excuses, he said, get dressed, we're going. So we hook up the trailer and we head out to the woods. We load the trailer with all the wood we'd previously cut. Then he tries to take off. Well, guess what? The tractor was stuck in the mud just as I had predicted. Frustrated, he decides to try to rock the tractor back and forth, and the violent rocking caused the rotting trailer's walls to collapse, dumping the entire load of wood. He makes eye contact with me, and of course I'm sporting an I told you so smirk. Shuts off the tractor and he climbs down. Help me get this wood out of the way, he barks out. In my teenage wisdom, I feel, well, now's a good time to play a practical joke on Dad. So I asked him, I'm like, hey, do you remember seeing a stray dog around the house the other day? He replied, yes, but he kept working, obviously not wanting to talk more about it. I said, well, I was playing with that dog and he bit me. I had to go see the doctor because the bite wasn't getting any better. Dad looked concerned, but he kept on working. I asked him, hey, Dad, have you ever heard of cat scratch fever? Yeah, I guess so. Well, apparently I had dog scratch fever. And you wouldn't believe what it's done to my neck. I said, here, feel my neck. No. I said, come on, Dad, feel it. I don't want to feel your neck, son. I'm like, come on, Dad. All right, fine. He takes off his glove, comes over, and he reaches out to my neck and did that. He jumped all over and then swings at me out of a fight or flight reaction. Fortunately for me, I leaned back in time and I felt the wind off his fist, which thankfully didn't connect. And like I said, I had it coming. And when I got into my first car accident with my Trans Am, I was so nervous about how Dad was going to react. I paced the floor for hours before he arrived. I was still 16. And once he arrived, I met him in his car as he opened the door. I said, Dad, I wrecked the Trans Am. He responded with, I have two questions. Is anybody hurt? No. Was it your fault? No. I don't want to talk about it. I paced the floor for nothing. A few days later, he said, son, you should get you a truck. So I bought a truck trader and found me a lowrider Porsche red show truck winner. I insisted we go look at it in Eulogy. After seeing it, Dad said, that's not exactly what I had in mind. But I begged and I pleaded, so we called about it the next day. The owner said, sorry, but someone has already made an offer and we've accepted. I was crushed, but Dad was overjoyed. He had found a regular, boring S10 pickup for sale in Asheville, North Carolina. So we take off to go to see it. Thankfully, by the time we arrived, they had sold it. Now, on the way back, Dad was saying, now, son, if that red lowrider truck had not been sold, I would have bought that for you. Yeah, I'm sure he would, Dad. I'm sure he was confident saying that because he knew the lowrider was gone. But when we got back home, we had a message from the lowrider owners. The deal had fell through and the truck was available again. Hey, Dad, you said I know what I said. But Dad was a man of his word, so he bought me the truck. I got the Trans Am all fixed up. So for a while, when I was 16 years of age, I had two vehicles. Both were show quality. These three friends were shaking their head yes, because they went to high school with me and they remembered. Meanwhile, Dad drove a beat-up 1981 Mazda GLC, beat up because his son used to go driving around in the woods with it and beat it up. He was a man who sacrificed for his children, another godlike quality. Dad poured the better part of his life into building our house. In 1982, he lost his fingers with a table saw accident, thus ending his hobby of playing the guitar. I remember in the 70s, I could set a watch by when Dad came home, 5 p.m. on the money every day. He would change out of his professional Clifton clothes and into jeans and a t-shirt and head over to our future home just down the road and work until late at night. I always think of Dad on that Miranda Lambert song, The House That Built Me. Plans were made and concrete poured, nail by nail and board by board. Daddy gave life to Mama's dream. Then the 80s came and he was promoted to engineering manager. Travel became part of his job and I could no longer predict when he would be home. Karen was heading off to college, so to help pay for her private education, he took a second job as a teacher of night classes at Tri-County Community College. There was a reason he would fall asleep in the chair, like that picture from the slideshow, every night. The man was tired. The man sacrificed. It is no coincidence that his first brain surgery and I graduating college both happened in 1995. He paid for all of my school and I graduated like Karen, completely debt-free. Dad's first symptom of normal pressure hydrocephalus was actually in 1989. He was in a meeting in Asheville and he stood up from the conference room table and immediately fell to the floor. His walking and ability to get up out of chairs slowly deteriorated for the next 6 years. I remember talking with Dad and telling him to go to the doctor, but he refused. In his mind, he was afraid that if he got a bad diagnosis, that he would have to quit work and thus be unable to pay for my college. So he delayed getting medical help until he knew that I would graduate. That is a man of sacrifice. I took him to all of his doctor's appointments in Atlanta as they searched for answers. His greatest fear was an MS diagnosis, as his dad had suffered terribly with that disease. When they finally got answers, he was relieved, but disappointed. He could not believe the picture of his brain. His ventricles were huge. Now, Dad knew he was a genius. You were correct. Very complex mind. He knew he was a genius, but he kept saying, I wonder how much smarter I would have been had I not had this problem. The diagnosis changed his outlook. He and I decided to get away for a while. So we traveled up to Dayton, Ohio and visited the Air and Space Museum. On the way back, he asked me to stop in at the Kmart that we drove by. He went in and bought 2 gloves and a baseball. For my entire life, he and I had never thrown a baseball together. He had been given a life-altering diagnosis, and he realized he had missed out. That song I played earlier, Dad by the Statler Brothers, captures my dad fairly well. He never took me fishing or mentioned the birds and the bees, and I can count on one hand the times he raised his voice at me. All of those lyrics are true. But once he was diagnosed with NPH, he tried to make up for lost time. I'll never forget the times he and I tossed the baseball around. He even invited my best friend, Jason Putnam, to toss the ball around with him when we were in our 20s. It made an impression on Jason. Kellen Rose took Dad, Gary Cook, and I on a deep-sea fishing trip, and we had a blast. He still never mentioned the birds and the bees, but he did read the movie Risky Business, so I was able to figure the rest out. The first brain surgery was a great success. He was walking and going up and down stairs with no trouble at all. Then about a year later, his shunt malfunctioned and he got very ill, and he regressed. They had to replace the shunt, so get another brain surgery. This became almost a yearly pattern. Add to that, multiple strokes. In 1998, he considered retirement, so Clifton began interviewing for his replacement. He encouraged me to apply, and so I did. I got the job. For 24 years, I had no idea what my dad did for a living. Now I got to witness and experience it firsthand. It was the greatest year and a half in my career life working with Dad. We carpooled and really got to know each other. We took breaks together, and we went to lunch together with his friends. thinking at the time, break. It's not in the script, sorry. But I come home and I just tell Vicki, I said, hey, ask Dad about Gary at break today. I'm sorry, Gary. Gary sat down on his imagination that day and went to the ground. But before landing, he tried to get airborne, and Dad watched the whole thing. And he thought it was the funniest thing. And so when he comes home and Vicki asks that, I mean, he shot, coke out his nose. I'm sorry, that's why I'm struggling up here with that. We took breaks together. I'll get back on track. And we went to lunch together with his friends. I got to be friends with Gary and worship with him this morning. I knew Dad was cheap, but I didn't know how cheap he was until I go to lunch with him at Clifton. We took turns paying and made it a competition who would get by with paying the least. When it was Dad's time to buy, he would make us all get water, and then he would ask for the senior citizen discount. I would say, Dad, the waters are free. Do you want Burger King to pay you to drink their water? Well, it'd be awful nice of them, son. I won, by the way, when I took us all to Taco Bell on 39-cent Taco Day. And then I think that's when we ended that. He and I got to work on projects together. I'll never forget the first time I caught a mistake he made. Now, it wasn't a big deal. But being the arrogant young child I was, I wanted to debate him, and I wanted to win the argument. When he realized I was right, a smile came across his face. I asked him, what is that smile about? You lost. He said, if you weren't my son, I would kick your ass. A little kitten coming in here and putting a scratch on this old tomcat's nose would not be tolerated if you were someone else. Now, everyone around us who heard us arguing knew that even though I had won the technical battle, he won the war by calling me a little kitten. Clifton sent me to Chicago for a trade show. Hundreds of booths were set up from vendors from coast to coast. Walking around the trade show, I was stopped by dozens of people who saw my Clifton badge and saw my last name. They all asked, are you related to George Morgan? And I would reply, I call him Dad. Then they would tell me some great stories of how Dad had helped them in solving problems, some engineering problem. I came back and realized he was a rock star in the synchro resolver world. I want to share one story I received on Facebook from Sharon Thompson Petit. There she is. Hey, Sharon. This came in after Dad died. Dan, as I thought about your dad and all the good times we had at Clifton, there was one thing that stands out in my mind. We were working on the OzM project, and George was over Rex in engineering and me in quality control. Bless his heart, having to put up with both of us in one dose. Anyway, the representative was coming in from Texas Instrument the next day, and we discovered that the terminals on the units were slightly shifting during one of the processes. We met and discussed whether to be quiet and see what happened, or be upfront with her and with the problem. She said, I learned that day that George was a man of great integrity. We all agreed to be upfront, and we told the representative as soon as she arrived. She was so thankful that we were upfront and called in her engineers to assist, and we were able to take care of the problem. This has always stuck in my mind as one of my great memories of what a fine man your dad was. Thanks for sending me that note, Sharon. He was a fine man indeed. And he knew he was, which is not arrogance if it's true. My sister shared the story of how she was riding with Dad after her engagement. Dad commented to Vicki, I'm not so sure about Mr. Wonderful. I hate to break it to you, but your mom got the last good man. Vicki, thinking he was teasing, started laughing until she looked over him and saw the serious look on his face. He wasn't kidding. It turns out he was right about Mr. Wonderful. He didn't just sacrifice for his children. Dad shared with me how growing up he wanted to get out of this one-horse town. Being an only child, he wanted to prove that he could make something of himself by not living near his parents. That is why he was excited to take that job with RCA in Virginia. When he arrived, he heard from his grandfather Joe that his dad had had a heart attack. Dad asked, should I return? Joe said, I can't tell you that, son. You have to make that decision on your own. So Dad quit his job, making $120 a week, came home and took a job making $60 a week at Cliff Precision. I'm glad he did, as that is where he met my mom. Like most of us, as he grew older, he began to appreciate living in this area. Then his crazy son moved away to Texas. I'll never forget when I told Dad and Mom I was going on a date with a girl I'd met on a business trip from Texas. Dad was trying to be funny, so he said, "You know, son, I was conceived in Texas." My reply, "Well, Dad, if I play my cards right, with any luck, your grandkids will also be conceived in Texas." Mom spun around and stomped out of the room. Dad looked at me and said, "Well, good way to go, smartass." Dad loved his wife, and he hated it when I ticked her off, which was quite frequently. When Mom and Dad got married, Mom wasn't saved. He was justifiably concerned about that. But, thankfully, he married her anyway. She was saved not long after Karen was born, which may explain Karen. Okay. Years later, he told Mom how he was concerned about her not being a Christian, and God told her to marry him anyway, to marry her anyway. And then he told her, "Just look at you now, Judy." I remember when Dad went to his 30th high school reunion. I waited up for him to come home. I looked through his yearbook and I found a really attractive supermodel of a classmate. So I asked him if she was there. He said yes. I asked if she was still gorgeous. He replied, "Your mom was the prettiest one there." "Oh, come on, Dad, you're just saying that." "No, I'm serious, son. Your mom was the most attractive person in the room." I learned a very valuable lesson that night. Choose your love and love your choice. That lesson came in handy this year at my 25th reunion, when our homecoming queen hopped in my lap and kissed me on the cheek for the class picture. You've been on Facebook, you've seen the pictures, guys. Like Dad, I've chosen my love, and I love my choice. I couldn't have made it without you, Andrea, this past month while Dad was dying. After Dad retired and his mom died, I begged him to move out to Texas. He wouldn't consider leaving the home he built and the area he now loved. Then a week before my twins were born, he and Mom rented the house right next door. Once again, he sacrificed, but now it was for the benefit of getting to know his grandchildren. And thankfully, my son has turned around. I'm so thankful for the decade we got to be together again. Karen correctly noted that Dad's life began and ended in Texas. After reflecting on that statement, I came to the conclusion that really, both Dad's earthly life and his heavenly life began in Texas. I have no doubt that on October 4th, when Dad went to sleep in Cedar Park, he woke up in Beulah land. Unlike when he was born into this world and his father didn't get to see him until he came home from the war and Dad was already a year and a half old, Grandpa was there to greet him on his heavenly birthday, and they ran the streets of gold together. Of course, his mom was there to greet him with a fresh batch of heaven-made gravy and biscuits he's missed out on for the last 3 years of his life. And I'm certain that his mother-in-law, Leela Soulsby, has already worked her way up to head chef in Glory's kitchen. So he was treated to a batch of her fried chicken, cornbread, and turnip greens, and he washed it all down with the original Coca-Cola before they changed the formula, right there. He was pleasantly surprised to see Hoyt, Kellen, Glenn, and his Uncle Jack. But then Dad said, "I want to see Jesus, the one who died for me and made this reunion all possible." And then Dad joined in that heavenly chorus, casting his crown at Jesus' nail-scarred feet, while singing, "Worthy is the Lamb, worthy is the Lamb, worthy is the Lamb, the one who is, and was, and is to come." And with all the suffering that Dad has endured, from the perspective of heaven, earth seems like one bad night at a hotel. Jesus' brother James records in his letter that our life is like a fog. You can see it for a short time, but then it goes away. Well, that fog that was my dad meant everything to me. Beyond all the education that Dad paid for, the roof that he put over my head, the multiple show cars he bought me, and the life lessons he gave me, the greatest gift that Dad gave me was how he lived his life. Like Chet Atkins said in the song earlier, I'm still trying to be like him. I have so far to go. It is so easy, though, for me to follow Jesus because I've always followed Dad. The last 3 years do not define my dad. Dad's parenting, his mercy, his self-sacrifice, and the love that he showed me and his family, that's what defines Dad. Thomas, Jamie, David, he was so much more than what you got to experience. He loved you three so deeply. I want you to know that. So Dad, if you can hear me, I never can repay you, no matter what I do. But I wrote this eulogy, and I gave it, and I did it just for your grandchildren. I love you, and I miss you, Dad.